Senator Hawley, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to the nominees. Thank you for being here. Ms. Johnson, if I could just start with you. You work at a large corporate firm here in town, I think. Is that right?
Yes, Senator.
You, according to the materials you submitted, you have represented, among other clients, the Boeing company since 2013. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
According to the same materials, for much of this representation, you served as the primary or the lead counsel for Boeing. Is that correct?
In certain matters, I did.
Is that litigation still ongoing?
No, it is not.
There's a case in particular I want to ask you about. It's a case that featured breach of contract claim, fraud claims, and trade secret claims by a company called Alabama Aircraft Industries. They allege that Boeing stole proprietary information when the two companies were working together on a joint bid for an Air Force contract. Now, a federal jury had already determined that Boeing owed this company $2.1 million for violating the bidding contract and for breaching a non-disclosure agreement. Boeing had previously, in 2006, paid a $615 million settlement to DOJ to settle claims that it had illegally obtained competitors' information with lucrative government contracts. And as I'm sure you're aware, Boeing has been at the center of major concerns about whistleblower retaliation, safety of its planes. In fact, we've heard testimony right here in this committee about all of that. Here's what I'm getting at. Boeing has engaged in corporate behavior in a pattern going back years now that, shall we say, is less than model. Do you have any thoughts about your representation of this company? Any regrets, any concerns?
In my work as an advocate, I have been duty-bound to zealously advocate for my client's best interests, and that is what I have done. As a neutral judge, I am very mindful that my role instead would be to apply faithfully and impartially the law to the specific facts that appear before me, and that is what I would do.
No moral qualms at all?
I believe that it has always been a strength of mine to be able to see the shared humanity in every one of my clients, no matter the issue. And I understand that as a judge, my role would be to fairly and impartially apply the law, no matter the parties or the issue that was before me, and that is what I would do.
Well, shared humanity, this is a corporation, though, isn't it? It's one of the biggest corporations in the world.
It is.
And one of the most profitable corporations in the world. I assume you chose to represent them voluntarily. I mean, right? You weren't forced to represent Boeing.
It was the case I was assigned to at my firm.
But you continued to do it. You served as lead counsel, I thought. There's multiple pieces of litigation in which you served as primary lead counsel for Boeing, correct?
There are multiple Boeing matters that I've handled.
Yeah. Okay, let me ask you about a different corporation that you've represented, the 3M Corporation, huge multinational conglomerate. In this case, the plaintiff was an individual named Jonathan Vaughn. He was an Iraq War veteran. He alleged that he'd suffered hearing loss stemming from his use of defective earplugs manufactured by your client. Vaughn was awarded $2.2 million in that case. Here's a report from the case. The jury decided that 3M's earplugs were to blame for his current hearing impairment, while also determining the earplugs were unreasonably dangerous, according to the verdict form. 3M misrepresented the quality of the earplugs and was negligent in their design. The report goes on to note that at the time of this verdict, this was the 9th of 15 cases against 3M to go against them in litigation over these earplugs. Just any conclusions or reflections on your involvement in that case?
Senator, I've had a varied practice handling cases that span the spectrum of legal issues and representing a wide range of parties throughout my career. And I believe that the litigation matters and the variation in the work that I have done has given me a very strong and versatile litigation skill set and a comfort in the courtroom that would serve me well were I to be confirmed to be a judge on the D.C. Supreme Court.
Okay, so you're not concerned is what I take from it. I mean, you don't have any regrets about representing either of these corporations in these various matters?
I believe that I have had a strong litigation practice throughout my career.
Well, I heard that part, but I'm just asking if you have any regrets, if you have any qualms. Sounds like you don't, which is fine. I just want to. I mean, obviously, you're a very talented person. You've done terrific work. You were made partner at a very early age, so you have a lot of skill. I'm just trying to figure out why you've chosen to use it for these particular clients.
I do not have regrets about my career. I believe that I have developed a strong litigation skill set that would serve me well as a judge.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. I have concerns. Obviously, I don't love the representation. These big corporate clients, these huge corporations, they've got so much influence in this capital. They've got so much influence in our economy. They've got probably every law firm in America lined up to represent them. And, I just think sometimes we got to ask ourselves, I mean, do these people doing these kind of things or ripping off people like Jonathan Vaughn, I mean, do they really need our representation? Obviously, every client's entitled to a vigorous defense, sure. But we still have to ask ourselves, I'm an attorney myself, we still have to ask ourselves as attorneys, should we be representing them? I mean, do we want to do that? Obviously, it's your judgment, so I'm not suggesting you've done anything wrong. I mean, it's 100% your judgment, and you did your job well. But I have to say, it concerns me a little bit. I'm almost out of time. Mr. McKenzie, I just want to ask you one thing really quickly here before my time expires. You wrote a letter in 2021 asking then Vice President Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment. I just want to quote you to make sure I get this right. You asked, that's the removal from office provision, the unfitness from office provision of the Constitution. So you urged then VP Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment against then President Trump to declare to the leaders of Congress that the president's unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. You went on to say that then President Trump was unfit for office and a reckless and wanton threat to the Constitution. Does that still reflect your views?
Senator, I do want to correct the record. I didn't write the letter. Along with hundreds of other folks, signed on to the letter because we were concerned about the events of January 6th.
Okay, you signed the letter, though.
Absolutely.
Does that still represent your views?
I signed the letter, Senator. I was concerned about January 6th.
Yeah, and you haven't changed your view at all that the ex-president is unfit for office, a reckless and wanton threat to the Constitution?
Under the Judicial Code of Ethics, if that matter were to come before me, it would be inappropriate for me to state my position at this time. So I'm precluded from stating that position.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out if your views changed. I think you've answered my question. I think your answer is you stand by it. You signed it. You stand by it. Is that fair to say? I'm not trying to get how you rule out a case. On a case. I'm just trying to figure out. You signed a letter. I just want to make sure that you haven't changed your views. I think you've answered my question. I think you said you stand by it. Don't let me put words in your mouth. But is that correct? You signed it. You stand by it. Is that fair to say?
It is correct that I signed the letter.
Okay. We'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Peters, and welcome to our nominees this morning. My first two questions are yes/no questions. We're limited on time. I hope you can give me a yes or no answer, and if you don't, I'll have to interrupt you if it's a long one. So the first one is, do you believe non-citizens are lawfully allowed to vote in the District of Columbia elections? Do you believe non-citizens are lawfully allowed to vote in District of Columbia elections? We'll just go down the row here. Ms. Beatty Arthur.
I'm not familiar with the case law that supports that, so I would not be able to give you an educated answer with that.
Ms. Boucher?
Yes, likewise, I'm not aware of any law that gives them the authority to vote. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Johnston?
That is not an issue that I have studied, but if it were to come before me as a judge, I would certainly evaluate the relevant precedent to apply it to the facts at hand.
Okay. Mr. McKenzie?
I'm not aware of any law or rule in that regard, so I can't say yes or no.
Okay. Mr. Trong?
Senator, similarly, I'm not aware of the legal issues on that.
Okay. The follow-up question is, do you believe illegal immigrants should be allowed to vote in D.C. elections? Do you believe illegal immigrants should be allowed to vote in D.C. elections? Maybe we'll start this way and go backwards. Mr. Trong?
Thank you, Senator. Again, I'm not aware of the mandates or D.C. law on that issue, so I'm unable to answer that question at this time.
Mr. McKenzie?
My decision on that, if it were to come before me, would be based on the law and controlling precedent. I'm not aware of it as I sit here today.
Ms. Johnston?
I am not familiar with any law on that issue and would need to review that law before making a decision if it were to come before me as a judge.
Ms. Boucher?
As a sitting judge, I'm not in a position, I'm not permitted to speak as to policy. If the law was in place and a case came before me, I would apply the law to the facts before me. Thank you.
Ms. Beatty Arthur?
Similarly, I'm also a sitting judge, and I'm precluded from making any assessments as to the appropriateness of that until it becomes a law.
Okay. My next question for Mr. McKenzie. This last October, a young person testified before the House Judiciary Committee about being the victim of an armed robbery on the streets of D.C. The criminal responsible was sentenced to just 1 year in prison, despite the criminal having robbed 6 victims and 2 businesses. After his release, the criminal went on to rob 2 more persons at gunpoint. I guess this is the bigger picture I'm after here, Mr. McKenzie, is what kind of message does that send to criminals in D.C.? And if confirmed, will you be tough on sentencing for violent repeat offenders?
Senator, I believe, as a father of 3, a husband of 1, public safety is a paramount issue. I'm concerned about crime every day living in the city. What I will commit to is if I'm confirmed to this position, I'll take a look at the facts of the case, look at the law that applies, and I will impose a fair and just sentence as required by D.C. law.
Okay. Ms. Boucher, would you answer that question too? What kind of message does this send to criminals in D.C.? And if confirmed, will you be tough on sentencing for violent repeat offenders?
Crime and public safety are concerns of mine. I was a single mother with young children, so I appreciate the significance of it. I believe the role of the court to address crime and public safety is to adjudicate the criminal cases that are before them, and I would, if confirmed as an associate judge, apply the standard guidelines pursuant to our criminal code.
I want to continue down this path of my personal concern about crime in D.C. I'm concerned when my family is here to walk more than a block or 2 from the Capitol. I'm concerned about my staff walking, the safety of my staff walking to and from the Capitol as well. In 2023, here in D.C., there were 274 homicides, 185 sexual assaults, 959 carjackings, 1,400 assaults with deadly weapons, 6,829 motor vehicle thefts. Just over the last 18 months, members of Congress and their staff have been assaulted, carjacked, robbed, and stabbed. This last October, the Senate Sergeant of Arms sent a bulletin out recommending that Senate staff drive with their windows up to avoid traveling alone in order to prevent getting carjacked in our nation's capital. Again, 7,000 car thefts last year. That's quite a few each day. In January 2023, the D.C. Council passed a bill that rewrote D.C. criminal code. It eliminated life sentences and got rid of a mandatory minimum sentencing for every crime other than first-degree murder. Under this rewrite, the maximum penalty for any individual convicted of using a gun to commit an act of violence dropped from 15 to 4 years. I guess the question to all, if you have time, several of you mentioned this. What is your level of concern for crime in the district, and what is your role in here? Maybe we'll start with Mr. Chong and just go down if you got a second.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator. As a father of a 4-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old daughter raising a family in Washington, D.C., the crime issue is a forefront issue in my family. However, if confirmed as a judge in D.C., I'm committed to following the sentencing guidelines, the applicable laws, and impose a just consequence when the case is presented to me.
Thank you. Mr. McKenzie, you basically answered the question already, but anything to add?
No, Senator.
Good answer. Ms. Johnston, go ahead.
Resident Mother raising 3 young children here, I think the public safety in this city is one of the most important concerns for the district. And if given the opportunity to serve as a judge on the DC Superior Court, my role would be to swiftly and effectively endeavor to resolve cases as quickly as possible so that the parties involved can have an appropriate resolution.
Ms. Boucher, you answered parts of the question. Anything you would like to add?
I would just like to thank the committee for having our nomination hearing. Our court needs more able bodies to quickly and adjudicate the criminal cases that come before it, and I think that that is the most powerful tool that we will have to address public safety in the District of Columbia.
Ms. Beatty Arthur?
I'm in complete agreement with my colleague, Judge Boucher. That is the best way to assist. And I, shout it from the rooftops. I'm very proud to be a native Washingtonian, but I would be absolutely remiss if I did not address the crime problem.
Thank you. Senator Langford, recognized for your questions.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. It is a long process to get to this day. It's a long process past this day, as some of you have seen as well. And there's a lot that's engaged in this. So I really appreciate you being here. I appreciate your families being here, and for all of you introducing your family. It's great to be able to see a very full room today with a lot of family members literally sitting behind you, as I'm sure they've been behind you a lot. Mr. Strong, I am tempted to ask every one of my questions to you because of the smiling 4-year-old over your shoulder, that every time the camera comes on you, it's fantastic. You have no idea what's happening behind you, but it's awesome. So you'll get a chance to watch the video of it later. I'm tempted to do that, but I'm not going to ask you every single question on it. You've been here before on that. Thank you for continuing to be patient as we go through this process.
Thank you, sir.
I really do appreciate that. And for several of you that mentioned your faith and your own personal journey and your personal life, thanks for the transparency of that as well, to be able to make that very clear. A couple of things that I want to just be able to bring up. Most every one of you have either used the term or reaffirmed this justice delayed is justice denied, and have talked about how quick you will move cases. That is one of the prime issues for me, is not just that we have someone there, that if someone actually comes, that I'll just say it, a lawyer who didn't do their homework doesn't get a slap on the wrist from the judge. The judge makes it very clear, we expect you to do your homework because I did my homework, and the client that you're representing needs justice and needs to be heard. So avoiding continuances, almost all of you have mentioned. I do appreciate that, and I would tell you from our side of the dais, that's extremely important, and is one of the things that we would expect judges in the D.C. court to actually do, is to make sure that everyone does their job, to be able to make sure everyone has a fair day in court and they have the opportunity to be heard. All of you have also mentioned things about fairness to the individual. I would just reiterate, you didn't have to say it, but let me make it clear. Fairness to the victim is also extremely important as well, and to the potential victims that are on the street, that they also want to know that they're being treated fairly also in the process. So there is an expectation to say, when people come before you, you're representing not only D.C., but for the millions of visitors that come through D.C., that they have an expectation that there are judges that are both not delaying cases, but they're also equally and fairly applying the law to be able to protect every person that's here and to make sure everyone has their opportunity to be able to heard in court. So I do appreciate those answers that several of you have already given on that. I do need to drill down just to be able to clarify some things as we've gone through several issues with our staff, and as we have talked through several things before on this, I want to drill down a couple of things. Ms. Beatty Arthur, by the way, I loved your opening statement on that. That was great, introducing your family and your faith and the journey that you've had here. Getting a chance to be able to work down the hall from your husband will be an interesting journey as well on that. That'll always be interesting, getting a chance to be able to talk cases over dinner and what actually happens next. You had a statement that you made at one point that I want to just be able to give you the opportunity to respond to. You were asked in a talk several years ago just about judicial activism, and in that talk you made this statement: I'm certain that in some unwritten place in the back of my mind, my race is affecting my decisions every day when I have cases that involve black people. So I, as a person, as an entity, I get that statement and that perspective. You also made the same statement about I didn't really understand my blackness until I had a black son. Now I have several black friends, and they talk openly on that journey with their sons and what it's like, especially with law enforcement interactions. I want to give you an opportunity to be able to talk about that, because the reason I say that is if an Asian family is in front of you in your court, if a Hispanic family is in front of you in court, whoever it may be, I don't want that statement to sit in front of them to think I can't get a fair hearing because I'm going to be treated differently than someone else in the court. So I want to give you an opportunity to respond to that.
Thank you, Senator. But I think what's important to note, and I don't recall the exact language I used at that talk, but I think what's important to note is that judicial activism is never appropriate in the courtroom. The statement that I didn't really understand, I think what you mentioned was the blackness until I had a black son. Right. I think it pushed it to the forefront, my discussion and thoughts about being black. But no matter what, when I wake up tomorrow, I'll be a black woman. That is still important to me. But who I am does not affect the type how I handle my cases. Between the Office of Administrative Hearings and the Superior Court, I've heard thousands of cases, and I push any thoughts or ideas or about race to the side, because every person that appears in front of me has an important moment, regardless of what their race or ethnicity is. I'm not, judicial activism is inappropriate in the courtroom setting. So I understand your question, but that's not who I am as a judge. And that's how how I provide myself in the courtroom setting.
Okay, that's fair. Thank you for that. Mr. Boucher, several members that are sitting in front of me have had some political activity in the past and donations that they've done personally on that. You're one of the folks that's here that at previous to you being a magistrate judge, you did political donations. How do you separate your politics from being on the bench and trying to say, okay, everyone has a political perspective. Everybody does. So how do you keep those two things separate when it is known what your political perspective is, but you're also sitting on the bench trying to be fair and equal?
Thank you, Senator. Quite simply, I don't consult my personal feelings when I'm on the bench. I have, as the deputy presiding magistrate judge, as a magistrate judge for the past 8 years, I have presided over more than 27,000 cases, and individuals from all parties have appeared before me. My role is to consider the facts, objectively apply the law, and render a timely decision. And that's what I've done as a magistrate judge. That is what I intend to do if I am confirmed as an associate judge. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Johnson, Mr. McKenzie was asked a question earlier about a letter that he had signed on to in the past. By the way, there's a special place in heaven for sixth grade teachers. I just have to tell you that as a former youth pastor myself, there's no time in a boy's life more interesting than sixth grade. And so for teachers that teach sixth grade, that's an impressive time for you to engage on that. Mr. McKenzie answered a question about a letter that he had signed on to earlier. You have a letter that you had signed on to right after the Dobbs decision. And in that letter, it makes a statement: the court has failed to uphold the promise at the very core of the Constitution, the promise of liberty, dispassionate, fair, and equal treatment for all under the law. Obviously, the court decision for the Supreme Court in the Dobbs decision was really not a decision about abortion so much as who should decide on that. Should that be in the court, or should that be in the legislature, states, federal, whatever it may be? So I want to press down on this a little bit just on that perspective, because I understand personal perspectives on abortion. You and I probably have differences of agreement on that. But it's the statement about the court has failed to uphold the promise of the Constitution, when really the decision was about court shouldn't decide this, the people should decide this. That's a different constitutional statement on it. So I want to give you the opportunity to respond to that.
Thank you, Senator. My personal views would not be a factor in my decisions as a judge, and I want to be very clear that Dobbs is the law of the land, and as a judge, my role would be to faithfully apply all binding precedent, including Dobbs, to any case that were to appear before me. Okay. And that is what I would do.
I appreciate it. It's not an unknown statement on this. I see that I'm over time. I apologize. We've had issues, for instance, in Washington, D.C., where there were 5 children that were found, the bodies that were identified, that looks like it was from a late-term partial birth abortion, which is not legal in Washington, D.C. Those bodies were identified, and then there's been this ongoing conversation about what's the follow-up? So the abortion question is not so much a question that's only federal or local or state or for the district, but it does come in criminal cases as well, in trying to be able to figure out what to do in a case, as we saw several years ago in Philadelphia, where late-term partial birth illegal abortions were being done, and they had to be able to follow through on that. That could be a case coming before you as well. Obviously, you're in Washington, D.C., and it'll be important that the law is applied no matter what the law is and based on what preferences are.
Yes, as a judge, I would be duty-bound to follow the law wherever it takes the case, and that is a duty I would take very seriously.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.